Hey there, hi there, hi there. We are live. What's going on? Happy, not Halloween. We are going to talk about horror films today, kind of in celebration of Halloween, but it is not Halloween anymore. So we had a costume party inside of our membership yesterday. It was really fun. We did spooky stories, we did silly jokes. It was very cool. So today I'm going to share with you in honor of the spooky season. It is Day of the Dead today. So, perfect day for us to be talking about horror films. And we're going to talk about horror films mostly about one particular type of horror film. But what I thought I would do is kind of walk through the different, well, two things about horror films, kind of the different types of horror films that there are. And then we'll talk about one type in specifically. And you might hear my dog floating around. She's here with me. She's scratching and jingling below. And then I want to talk a little bit about world building, kind of leading into that. So let me get your chat up so I can see all y'all. Lovely to be here. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. And it's always really fun to be here and do these kinds of, live sessions. It's really cool. So hang on. There we go. So lovely to see you. So we are going to dive into horror films. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff, because we do these trainings pretty much weekly. We come in every week, or it's either a live training like I am today, or it's something that we've pre-recorded, some kind of thing that I put together that I'd love to share with you. So we do this so that you can kind of get to know Hollywood gatekeepers. We are here to train people how to become expert readers for the film industry. That is our mission. We want to create people that are readers that support writers, that really champion the writer and really get behind and figure out how to kick that gate open with a writer. And then we also want to support producers. They're insanely busy. We want to be that person that can read the screenplay, analyze it, and let them know, is this a good project that you should dive into? So that's why we're here. That's what we're doing. There's so many different topics we can talk about it. Talk about as we go through all the things that you learn in order to be a reader. I'm also a certified life coach. So it also has to do with making sure that your life is even keeled as possible so that you can write coverage that really supports people and you're not taking your angsty life out on your coverage. So that's why we're here. So today, in honor of the spooky season, we're going to be talking about horror films. And I want to start by talking about a concept of world building. Now, we could do a whole, and I think I probably will do a whole session on world building. I'm also a writer and I'm working on a film right now, and we are world building in a big way in this film that I'm working on. And world building has to do, there's soft and hard world building, and it has to do with creating the world that we're in for the story. So, most stories are the world, the present day Earth, we can kind of all relate to. And then it's different scenarios within, within the world, soft world. That's the world. So and then a lot of films are kind of, they're what's called soft world building because they're basically Earth, but there's a little tweak to it. So like Toy Story, it's Earth and there's people and all that, but this little corner of it, the toys come alive, right? So you're building a new world, a little tweak to the world that we all are familiar with. So, and then within the world that we're all familiar with, of course, there's huge differences in cultures, in locations, in the way that we live our lives. There's so much you can do, but we don't have to sit there and go, what world is this? Like we watch a movie and we can pretty much say, oh yeah, okay, we know that we're here on Earth, some corner of the world, right? Of the round world. Maybe the world's square and we're in a corner of the world. So yeah, so John Wick, really good point. John Wick is it's a really good one. Like it's pretty much Earth, like it's that, but it's taken it, and there is some world building in there, in that they have some rules that they're following, and I haven't dove into John Wick in a really deep level. I've enjoyed the films, but there's definitely a world within the world. So it's not just completely like this is normal everyday life, right? There's definitely kind of a world order there that's a little bit different. So they've built this kind of world within a world, right? And that's what world building is. Now you can go all the way down to a hard world where you have a lot of rules, and there's rules and stuff in John Wick, but I'm talking about we're not on the planet, so in a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars starts with the scroll, just so you know. We're not on Earth. This is not a normal thing. We are in a galaxy, long time ago, far, far away, whatever it is, right? Like it's saying, like, leave behind everything you know to be true. And we're going to create this new world for you where everything's different. And, you're going to have to relate to the people in this world. So, and then you can go all the way down to, Harry Potter has a lot of, a lot of adaptations will sometimes have world building where they've built a world that there's all kinds of rules and there's all kinds of this means that and you're this and or that. Star Wars does it, Harry Potter does it, Lord of the Rings would be probably as far over to hard world building as there is. So I'm not going to go. That's about all I want to do on world building today because we're actually talking about horror films. But the reason I wanted to bring up world building is because in horror films, we are bringing up, we are creating somewhat of a world. A zombie film, we are typically it's on Earth and we kind of do that, but it's a different world, right? We don't have a zombie apocalypse yet. We haven't had that kind of thing happen. Somehow it seems all possible now, though. I don't know why, but it is like that idea of like this is a new world, that we have built with this particular thing that everybody knows is a real thing, right? And so we kind of all accept it. And horror films fall into this because typically horror films have rules. There's rules that need to happen in a horror film that has to do with a zombie film is a great example. We have certain tropes and certain ideas of how certain horrific characters behave, how a zombie behaves, how a vampire behaves, how a werewolf behaves. There's certain sort of universal rules that we've all accepted about, if you get bitten, if a zombie, get my grammar together here. If a zombie bites you, you will become a zombie. That's sort of a rule across zombie films, or you will become infected, right? So that's a rule on all of those: the werewolf, the vampire, the zombie. Those kinds of rules. Movies, you get infected by whatever the thing is, and so that world of that rule that stays in place unless you come up with some twist on it, some way that, oh my gosh, we didn't know this about it. You can break the rule as long as the rule is in place to begin with, because there's certain things that people, I want to say believe, but that's not exactly right, that people sort of expect is a better word for it, out of a film like that. Or expect from a vampire film. We expect certain things, that the vampire needs to be welcomed in, that they can't see themselves, that the sun will kill them, the wooden stake to the heart, all of those things about vampire, the world of vampires, we either need to include in our horror film about vampires, or we need to talk about why that rule doesn't apply or isn't right or whatever it might be. So when we do create these worlds in a horror film, just really being aware of what rules you're putting into place, what if you're doing something that is a monster of some kind that's familiar, that you're making sure that you are explaining that. And these are also things as readers that we look for in a screenplay that we can help a writer or let a producer know, like, here's the things that are being broken, or here's the things that need to be more developed because it's going against this without explaining it, or we're not quite understanding where the world is. And there's so many different, you can mash up genres, and I haven't really seen this. Here's an idea. I haven't, or maybe I'm sure the minute I say it, someone will tell me a movie that is this, but like a vampire in space, like a futuristic vampire, or that kind of thing, where we're looking. I mean, some zombie films go back and forth for sure for time periods, but we tend to go backwards in time with vampire movies. So it's kind of interesting because it's such an old lore, right? So when you go through and you're creating a horror film, or when you go through and you're reading a horror film and you're trying to give good critiques about it, kind of understanding the basic rules of horror and the basic structure of a horror film. A horror film, in my opinion, romantic comedies and horror films are the two most formulaic genres. So people have certain expectations when they come to a romantic comedy. They expect it to be funny. It is a comedy, and they expect there's love. It's romantic. It's going to be romantic. Love will be found, matchmaking will happen, like we expect this kind of uplifting sort of light. It can have overtones of meaning that is thoughtful, that is heart-wrenching. You can have moments of that, but in general, it's a feel-good, lovely exploration of chemistry and people coming together. Horror films are kind of the opposite of that, right? We have a certain expectation that we will be entertained and yet scared. We will be made to scream and think to some degree, depending on the type of horror film. So there's a lot of different genres of horror film and a lot of different subgenres. So when we talk about, we sort of made up this hierarchy so that we could teach genre and talk about it in an easy way. And that is the idea that there are root genres, which are drama, comedy, horror, and thriller. And that those are those are the base genres that there are. And then there's form genres on top of that. And so that there's several that we've identified as being form genres. And the reason that we kind of inside of Hollywood Gatekeepers, we put this together is so that as a reader, we can look at genres and we can see like what are the rules that we're going for, what is the look that we're going for. And so there's the overall tone of the screenplay, which is that root genre. And then there's kind of the look of it, and that has to do with the form that you want to take. So some of the forms that we have are anime, animation, buddy, campy, comic book, ensemble, epic, fantasy, farce, melodrama, musical, noir, period, religious, road trip, romantic, sci-fi, slasher, spoof, western, and zombie. So as you can see, like it's quite a few, right? But all of those, if it's a western vampire movie, it's going to have a completely different look than if it's a film noir vampire movie, right? So understanding what form you're writing in and sticking to that form. Now you can veer and you can play a little bit, and knowing the rules means that if you know the rules, then you can break them intelligently and it can be very interesting. If you're just writing willy-nilly and you're not paying attention to any of that, you'll lose your audience. They're trusting you with their time and their attention, which is two of the most valuable things in the world. So they're trusting you with that. So you want to take them on an adventure that they'll be able to identify. So then within the horror genre, you have different types of horror films, right? You have psychological horrors, films where it's all about the mind games. Those are films like Silence of the Lamb, Get Out, Psycho, has to do with the mental health of what's happening. Those are becoming really, really kind of more popular as we become a society that's becoming more, thank goodness, finally, more in tune with mental health. Then we can play with some of these themes a little bit more to it, right? And then you have your basic slasher films, which means it's like super violent. You can expect that we're going to see like there's some killer on the loose and they're really like going crazy, killing people. And the terror kind of comes in the horror film of a slasher in the attack, right? In that kind of thing. And I also want to clarify the difference between terror and horror. Terror is something that we're expecting, we're anticipating, we're terrified, we don't know, we haven't figured it out yet. It's what the character is going through before the thing happens. And then as the thing happens, we're moving into horror, the horror of it all, right? When we see the violent thing happen, those are kind of the two things that we play with within a horror film. So you've got slasher films, and then you have gore, which is a little bit different than a slasher film. A gore is really focusing on bodies, body parts, like really kind of really stylistic shots, that kind of thing. And then you have body horror, which has to do with the movie Tattoo, where they tattoo the body, Boxing Helena, that has to do with something to do with bodily parts, being part of the whole overall thing, right? Eraserhead. And then you have paranormal movies, ghost stories, all the ghost stories, Paranormal Activities, Ghost, these movies have to do with a ghost coming in or some paranormal activity, which also leads me to found footage. That's a relatively, well, it's one of the newer, I wouldn't say it's new anymore, it's decades old, but it is one of the newer types of horror film, and that is Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activities, where we find some footage, and then by watching that footage, it means something. Cloverfield, Skinwalker Ranch, these are all films that have to do with found footage. And then you have your basic monster movie. So monster movies can be things like Frankenstein, Creature of the Black Lagoon, Shape of Water, and it can also be, though, like Jaws is a monster movie, right? It's about a monster that's coming and eating people. We don't really think of it as a horror film, but it absolutely falls in that genre. You've got your romantic, sensual films that a lot of times vampire movies have to do with that, Interview with a Vampire, Twilight. But it also goes to like Fatal Attraction, those kind of films, Single White Female, where it's like there's some kind of relationship thing that's happening. And then you've got your basic zombies, and then your comedy, campy or spoof films, and then franchises come out of horror films. Horror films are one of the most easiest films to franchise. Marvel and the comic book movies are giving horror films a run for their money, except the difference is those are very expensive films to make, whereas horror films can be very inexpensive. And so everyone screams in the same language. So horror films are a really great film type of genre for a young filmmaker to put their film together, because they're usually contained, meaning they stay in one location, and they also don't require big movie stars. Most horror films, when they first got their start, didn't have big movie stars. Now more movie stars are liking to do horror films, but it doesn't have to have that, because that's not why people go to it. They go to it for a whole different reason than seeing a movie star. It's an added perk, but you don't have to have that to make a horror film. And so they're usually low budget. They're easier to produce. They're in one location. So that's why a lot of filmmakers will start their careers with horror films. So those are just some of the things about horror films that, in general, that I wanted to say. And then the one I wanted to focus on a little bit more, a little deeper here, is the concept of us versus them and how that plays out in horror films. Horror films are one of the most unique genres in terms of reflecting culture. So all movies reflect culture to some degree. We either are shaping culture, we're coming up with new ideas that are inspiring people, right? Or we're seeing something and we're commenting on that and putting it out there. So it goes both ways, right? Movies inspire people, they inspire people's lives to change, and movies also reflect, right? We do both things. Horror films can really be a reflection of society. It can be a reflection of the seven deadly sins, right? Seven was a total reflection of, the seven deadly sins and how that forms into people killing people. And there's several movies that play on those kinds of themes. Biblical themes are often played on in horror films. So you have, The Exorcist, Omen, like these films that play on religious beliefs, that kind of thing. So it really does comment on society. Us versus them is so fascinating because it really comments on the us versus them concept. And so some of the obvious ones are zombie films, vampire films, werewolf films. So these are movies where if you get infected, like we talked about, if you get infected, you become one of them. And there's like, you will take your own life before you become one of them. But it's never really like, maybe it's not so bad being a werewolf. We don't know. We're only seeing them when they're feeding. Maybe they go back home to their little werewolf den and they're like, hey, cuddling. It's all okay. Or they're people, werewolves, right? So Twilight kind of played with this idea, right? That they have regular lives unless they're werewolves. So they have like, you can play with these themes, right? And Twilight turned the werewolf, trope on its head and turned it into something a little bit different. Brilliant taking werewolves and vampires and putting them together, but putting them together in a whole new way, right? Really interesting. So you can take these kinds of ideas, and the really cool thing about Twilight, like it or not, you've got a character with Bella that's walking the line between human, vampire, werewolf. I love it all. I love you. I love you. She doesn't really care about being a human too much, it seems, but it's like she's a human being. She fears death. It's just a common thing for humans to do. And yet she's walking a line with where does she want to live her life? And that's a really interesting thing to explore. In most us versus that, I think that's one of the reasons why that movie works well, is that it's playing with that us versus them theme, and it plays with, no, you don't want to be them. Well, you really don't want to be them, but maybe I do want to be them. And who's us? And it really moves that around quite a bit, explores it in a big way. When typically an us versus them film is, I will die before I become one of them. If a zombie bites me, like, that's it. I'm just going to shoot myself because I don't want to be a zombie. I don't want to eat people. It's putting your values that you have as a human onto the creature that you would become. So as a human, it's appalling to think of eating other people and, living the life as a zombie. But, and some things have played with this, Warm Bodies. There have been things of playing, even Shaun of the Dead does it a little bit where he's got him later in a little pen, kind of thing. But it, maybe being a zombie and just being able to kind of cruise around and like might be all right. We don't know. So, but it is that idea of, I would do anything before I become them. And then in the vampire genre, you have, in that kind of monster movie, there's this class also like there's and some of these infection kind of movies also play with the idea of class. Zombie not so much because it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, or how important you are. If you get hit by a zombie, doesn't really matter. But in the vampire thing, the vampire is cool. The vampire somehow has a lot of money. The vampire's like, you have to be invited in. They're very charming. They're very sensual. Like they kind of entice you into the us thing, right? And then you also have there's many, many movies about the devil coming in and enticing people, devil's advocate, and being like, this is really bad, this is really awful, but it's super enticing. And you might want to have this, that, this, that. So that there is this us versus them scenario that's happening as the character tries to grapple with it. So it becomes really, really interesting. Yeah. So some people love the Twilight movies, the Twilight books. I've read all the books as well. I had a project that was potentially going to be working with that author, read all the books, and then kind of looked at all the movies from a really strong structural overview. And so what she does brilliantly is takes stories that are well known, ideas of vampire werewolf, and totally turns it on its head, adds a romantic scoop to it, and just creates these compelling characters that are dealing with the vampire genre in a whole different light, right? So that's what I wanted to share with you today about the us versus them theme. Now look into us versus them is a very common thing in movies in general. It's like you don't want to join that gang. I want every time I'm out, they pull me back in. I don't want to be a mobster. Breaking Bad, Pink, Jesse Pinkman. His character is so great. His character is the conscious, is the conscious voice of the whole series. He's the one that gives the whole thing a conscience. He's like, this isn't right. Even though he's a drug dealer, he's always playing that line of I'm not doing this. This is terrible. He's torn up by it. Like it's a really fascinating character. And so the idea of Walter White coming in and deciding to be one of them, he gives up his being us to become one of them in order to preserve us, right? He wants to save his family. So he becomes a drug dealer in order to save his family. But the beautiful arc to it is that as he gets into that world, it's not so bad being one of them. Like I'm actually feeling powerful, and there's some perks to this idea of being them. And I'm able to sort of rewrite my past and all the mistakes I made and the regrets I have by becoming something else. And so his whole arc is, what happens to someone who has sort of given up who they are inside. They find something else, seemingly out of a way, just to, not really thinking it through, but then having that become who they become. And so it's fascinating. That's one of the best arcs in a show ever. It's just fascinating. And the character, they do it in a great way. And they knew that that's what they were going for from the very beginning. They were like, how did Scarface become Scarface? What if we took a guy that just you would never in a million years could think could be Scarface? How does he get there? And so that's what they were exploring. Beautiful. And they do it in a really great way in that early on, all of his scenes where he's fighting someone or someone dies, it's all self-defense. And then halfway through the series, all of the series, he takes a turn and he allows someone to die when he could save them. And that is a huge step from being like, I'm just saving myself, to being like, oh, it's better for me if this person doesn't live, but I could save them. And this person isn't someone that is threatening me in any way threatening my life. They're threatening my lifestyle. Much different, right? So that is a huge churn when he makes that decision. And so then from then on, now he's flipped over, and now he's grappling with becoming a mobster, basically, or a really seriously bad guy. So looking at these us versus them themes is something when you're looking at a screenplay and you're doing a coverage and you're trying to help that writer find a new level. If they just go through, or if you write horror films, go through your story, see if us versus them is part of your arc. And if it isn't, consider maybe it should be. It's a really great groundwork for horror films in general. It's a really great groundwork for characters to make decisions about what side they're on. It's all war films are us versus them. It's always interesting when you pull a character out of them and put them with us. It is a strategy in war. And it's actually, I've worked on a project about Genghis Khan for years and years. And one of the things that historically that he would take, he would conquer villages, and then he would force them to kids from each other's villages and raise them, because what he was trying to do was mess up all of the villages so that they didn't have their own identity anymore, so that the overruling person would be him and his world, right? So he's taking and messing up all of their values, all of their systems, by messing up the families and by pulling children from this family and giving it to this village, so that this village is now raising their what used to be their enemy, but now they have to learn to live together because there's a bigger enemy, right? The common good. I mean, a lot of people say what this world needs is a really good alien attack so that we all join together, right? His strategy was, if I can conquer them more easily if I destroy their us versus them within their worlds, because now I'm the them and they're all us's, but I can control that better. So really interesting, right? So if you don't have an us versus them within your story, consider adding it, or consider suggesting that as a reader to a writer or to a producer. If the script is missing something, it might be that. It might not be that it has to have that and it needs, but if by adding that, it might add another layer to it. So I wanted to reveal that to you, talk about horror films, celebrate Day of the Dead, and thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to these sessions. I have a really great time. Again, make sure that you join the Facebook group. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, make sure you ring the bell so that you get notified. When you do that, you'll just get notified whenever we have a free training. And we do these a lot, and we always pick a topic that I think would be good, helping you both write screenplays as well as read and analyze screenplays. So keep an eye out. We are doing a brand new workshop next week. There's already, if you're in the Facebook group, you guys were voting on it. I was like, pick what you want to learn. It was like all of it. It was so sweet. It was like, oh, everybody wants to learn so many things. I absolutely love that. Being a great learner myself, I love learning, but it was like, I want to learn all of these things. So we're going to dive in next week with a new workshop. We're starting with the reading, how to make money reading and analyzing screenplays. So we're doing that workshop next week. And so keep an eye out for that. Email registration should open the next day or so. So really lovely to be here. You guys are the best. Thank you. Thanks. And thanks for coming. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, you guys.